Hello, my name is Mike McKee. Welcome. Today, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the Alteryx Designer Intermediate tools. These are tools that go beyond the core tools and won't be covered on the core exam, but will be covered on the advanced exam. These are the tools that'll help take your workflows to the next level, add a lot of capabilities, and allow you to do things in a much simpler way. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Attached to this presentation, I also have a zip folder. Just like in the other courses, the zip folder has a variety of data inputs, many of which are already brought in on the canvas. A place to put output data. We're not actually putting any output data, but there's a structured place for it just in case. I have the intermediate tools template, which is what we'll be starting with. Go ahead and double click this or navigate to it. And then of course the intermediate tools, the answer key, the final version of what we're going to build today. All right, let's go ahead and get started building. The first tool that I'd like to talk about is the directory tool. Now, the directory tool allows you, in combination with a couple of other tools, to bring in a variety of files all at once. So, I can go ahead and I can grab the directory tool here and drag that down. And then I will go ahead and I can point this to my data input. And if I run that, it looks at the data input directory and it grabs all the files from the data input. Right? Now, obviously, I could be a little bit more specific about this because there's some PDF files and miscellaneous things in there. There's an Alteryx database. So maybe I just want to say, okay, I want all the files that are XLSX, right? Whether you want to include subdirectories or not. And so I can narrow that down. I could even use more wildcard searches by saying, I want the store file or whatever. Right? So a variety of ways of approaching that. In addition, it's going to go ahead and give you the creation time, the last access time, and a variety of other metadata about the file, right, which can be useful. All right. Now, generally what I would do is I would go into preparation, and I'll just grab a filter for example here, but I would use my Alteryx analytics to go ahead and decide what files that I actually want to bring in. Okay? Now, in this situation, I want to bring in all the files that have store in the name. So I will go ahead and I will just say that the file name contains the word store. Right? Now, I could pivot on any one of these attributes. So just be aware of that. I run that, and now I've isolated down to just the store files. Now, obviously, I could have done it in here. I'm just illustrating this because you may not be able to do a clear wildcard search. You might need to search on a regular expression or something along those lines. You might need to do more detailed analytics to choose which file, or perhaps you're looking at like a creation time or something along those lines. All right, so now I have a list of the files that I'm looking for. The full path is probably the most valuable, and that's going to give you the full path to the file, including the file name and the extension. It does break that up into more details, the directory and the file name, but I'm just going to use the full path at this point. And the second tool that I'd like to talk about is going to be the dynamic input. Okay? Best way to do it is just to search for dynamic. Go ahead and grab dynamic input and drag it down. We talked about these first 5 sections, and that's going to be the most of what you're going to do. It's going to be the core. But when you're looking at the dynamic input, that comes down here to the developer section, and you have the dynamic input. There's some really interesting tools in here that you might play with. If this is not on your dashboard up here, there's a little cog over here that you can click for add remove tools, and you could add or remove the different sections. And then when you're in a specific section, you can even add and remove individual tools. So you could pretty much customize this to be exactly what you're looking for. Obviously for my purposes, I have everything selected, but once you decide what you're using and what you need, it might make sense to get rid of some of the things that are up here and consolidate a little bit to make things a little bit easier to find. All right, let's go ahead and we're going to attach the dynamic input. Now, the thing about the dynamic input is that it is going to require a sourced template. All right, this is the only disadvantage to it, is that you will have to have a file that has the same schema. Right? What I recommend is getting a template file, putting it in the same directory as the workflow, and then you don't really need to worry about it anymore. Right? But if your source files vary from that, it'll cause you problems. So let me go ahead and click edit. And you'll note that it's bringing up a file just like everything else. I'm going to go ahead and set up a connection. I'm going to go to Files, select a file, and I'm going to grab one of my store files. Right? Okay. Now, what the dynamic input is going to do is it's going to look at this file and it's going to recognize the schema of it. But when it actually brings in the files, it's going to change that data source based upon what I put in here. Okay, so let me look at my incoming data here. I got the full path, and you'll note that the full path is up here. The field for that is the full path. And what I want to do is I want to change the entire file path. And now when I run that, you'll note that I've got my north, my south, and my west file. And those were the three files that were in there. Go ahead and pull over that directory and take a look at that data input. I got the north, the south, and the west files. And it pulled all three of those files into my designer. So this is a really, really handy way of bringing in multiple files that have the same schema. But wait, you say, what if I want to do something a little bit different? Well, there's a lot of other ways that we can go ahead and use this. Right? So let's take a look at another example here for the dynamic input. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go to in out and I'm going to drag down an input data tool. And with this input data tool, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to point it to my directory. And let's go to Files, select a file. And what I want to do is I'm going to get multiple Excel spreadsheets. Right? Now this is not a file that we've seen before. Okay, I'll go ahead and run this. And if we take a look at this file, it's just got some dates in it and some miscellaneous information, on a date basis. So January, February, March. Now, I just pointed to sheet 1, but what I'd like to do is instead of pointing to the sheet, I'm going to import only the list of sheet names. All right, again, this is a new feature, something we haven't really talked about before. I'm going to click OK, and I'm going to run that. And now what you'll see is that it's going in there and it's actually pulling the individual sheets. It's not getting the data at this point. It's just getting the sheets. All right. So what I can do now is I can go back to that dynamic input. And I'm going to hook up the dynamic input. And then I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, again, I do have to have that data source. Set up a connection. And I'm going to point it to the multiple sheets. and it's pulling up the schema. All right, now, when I configure it this time, I don't have a, go to my input data, I don't have a full file path, I'm just looking at sheet names. So what I can do is I can change my field to sheet names. So it's pulling in individual sheet names. And this time, instead of changing the entire file path, I'm changing the file or the table name. All right. So when I run this now, what I get is it pulls in those files. I've got February, January, and then I've got two Marches. There was the March and then the sheet 1 March. And so it's actually pulling in each of the individual sheets in this spreadsheet. I use this tool to enumerate the sheets themselves, the input, and then I use the dynamic input to change each one of those sheets on the source in order to pull in all of the sheets. Right now, again, your schema has to be similar, right? If not exact. And so you need to be a little bit careful about that. All right, well, what if I want to take this to the next step and I want to say, okay, well, but I've got a bunch of spreadsheets and stuff that I want to do this with. All right, we can even do that with this as well. Again, same concept. If we're going to use the dynamic input, they all have to have the same schema. But I'm going to go ahead and drag a data input tool down. Right. Now, for the configuration for this one, I'm going to set up a connection, go to Files, select a file, and I've got my group files here. And I'm going to say group. Okay, and top 10 is fine for that. Now, in this situation, when I pull in my group files, instead of listing out here the exact name of the group file, I am going to say group asterisk .xlsx. And so what this will do is this will bring in all the files that have the group, the name group in it, right? And I can run that, and it's obviously not going to work because I don't have a sheet connected and stuff like that, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click this right here, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to, whoop, let me set that up again. I guess I have to do this from the very beginning. And I'm going to import the list of sheet names. And then I'm going to go ahead and go asterisk here. Right? Run that. And now I got the list of sheet names from every file. However, that's just the sheet names. I can't point this to multiple files. So I look at my options here. And we talked about options 6 and 7, which was the first row containing data and being able to move down. But what I want to do is option number 5, I'm going to get the full path. So when I run that, that now gives me the full path to the file. Right? Note, it says list of sheet names, but I've got, February, January, and March down here. But that is the individual file that I was pulling to get this information. All right. Now what I want to do is I'm going to actually build a file path. So I go into preparation and I'm going to grab a formula tool down and I'm going to hook that up. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a column called full path. I'm going to go ahead and go to the FX here, come down to string, and I'm going to find the replace function. So I want to replace string target replacement, because functionally what I'm doing here is I want to look at this file name and I want to replace the list of sheets, this word right here, with my sheet name. And that'll give me the format that Alteryx likes to be able to pull that. So let's go ahead and get that replace up there. Now, the string, and I'm going to go ahead and just do a left square bracket to pull that up, is going to be the file name, because this is the string that I'm looking at. Now, the replacement, and I'm going to go ahead and just copy this. Now, the target is going to be quote, list of sheet names, quote. And then the replacement is going to be the sheet names. Right? You can see the data preview here, and it's still going to be a string. I run that. And what that does is my full path now has been changed, so the list of sheet names is the actual sheet name itself. All right. Now I'm going to go ahead and grab a filter, and I'm going to hook that up. Okay. And in this filter, I'm going to say, okay, what I want to do is I just want to get the individual sheets in here that say sheet, right? When I'm looking at my data source here, each one of these tabs in my situation has a different set of data. So with this filter, I'm going to go ahead and filter out the sheets that have the common schema. So I'm going to go sheet names, contains, sheet, and run that. And then that filters out just these three that I'm looking for at this point. All right, now come back to that dynamic rename. That's right, dynamic input. Hook that up. And so this is going to be very, very similar to pulling in the full path that I did earlier. Right? So I do need to point this. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set up a connection. I'll go to files. I'm going to select a file. I'm going to go ahead and grab group here. And I am looking for sheet. All right. Now, I'm going to change the path to the full path and change the file or table to change the entire file path like we did in the very first example. And now I'm going to go ahead and run this. And now what it's doing is it's pulling in those sheets. There's February, January, and March. So very similar to the way it did before, but this allows you to pull in a group of files, define the full path, filter out, and obviously I could have done the filter before or after. Probably would have been smarter to do the filter before, reduce your data set in the beginning. But go ahead and create the full path, reduce the data set to what you're looking for, and then you can use the dynamic input to go ahead and grab multiple files, multiple sheets, really whatever you need. All right. The last example I'm going to go ahead and show you here is a database example. Okay. Now, with the database example, it's a little bit more interesting. All right. So when I look at this, I've created a text of different aspects of sheets in a database. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my dynamic input. I'm going to go ahead and edit up here. And I'm going to go to my Snowflake database. Right? Now, when I'm looking at my Snowflake database, I'll go ahead and I'll set up a connection for you. It takes just a minute to do it. So pause with me here. I've already got the ODBC set up. And so I can go ahead and connect to it directly. The configuration of the ODBC is beyond what we're going to talk about today, and configuring it in DCM. I'll probably do another segment on that a little bit later. But this goes ahead and it allows you to connect to the Snowflake database through ODBC. And then I will go ahead and let me see my sandbox here. Open that up. And this is actually going to the Snowflake database directly right now. And then in that sandbox, I will open up my schema. And then that schema will show you the different tables that I have to pull from. Right? So when I'm looking at the tables here, all right, when I'm looking at the tables here, the the tables that I'm looking at are going to be the Colorado stores north, south, and west. Okay, so I go ahead and just pick north, just drag that over, and I'll just grab everything, right? You'll note that I've got a SQL statement right here where it's grabbing this file it's grabbing everything from this file. All right, I click OK. Typically I test the query, but I know this is going to work. And then OK on this. And now what I want to do is I'm going to modify the SQL query. Right? So I will go ahead and I will edit this. And there's my SQL query right there. And what I'm doing is I'm replacing north. Now, let me go ahead and add one for you. So you do have a couple of different options. You can pass fields, replace specific strings, etc. I'm replacing a specific string. You can see there is the entire SQL query. And all I want to do is I'm just going to erase everything except for the word north. Right? And then I can click OK. It's replacing that specific string and only that specific string, but it'll replace it in every situation. So when I run this, and it does take a minute because it needs to go out to that Snowflake database, but it is pulling all of those files. I'm going to take a look at that. I've got north, south, and west. So bottom line is that in this example, you have the directory tool, which can look at a network drive, local drive, pull the information about the drive so that you can go ahead and filter things and then use the dynamic input to pull things in. We talked about how you can pull multiple sheets from a single spreadsheet, how you can get a list of spreadsheets and the tabs that are associated with it, create your file path, and then go ahead and pull with the dynamic input. And then we also saw how we can use the dynamic input to even pull from a database. Okay? The big thing to remember here and the key is to make sure that your template file, the file that we're pointing the source for the dynamic input tool, is the same schema as everything else, right? Absolutely critical. All right. If you have different schemas, that would be more of a batch macro, and we'll talk about that in another session. All right. Now, let me go ahead and talk about the testing tool, right? Now, what the testing tool does is the testing tool allows you to do validations within your workflow. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's grab the testing tool. And I'm going to drag that down. Okay. And I can go ahead and I can add and I can create tests in here to go ahead and do different things. Right. Let's start simple. I'm going to grab a filter down. I'm going to hook that filter up to my input up here, right, where I'm pulling my folders. And all I'm going to do is say that the full path is not null. So I run that. Oh, let me go over here. And this is something, a great place to do containers. I'm going to turn this container off. because it does take a while to grab that database. And now when I run, you can see it's much, much faster. So on the true anchor here, I've got a variety of information, right? All my files and stuff, right? So what I want to do is I'm going to say, okay, let's hook my testing tool up to the true anchor. And I'm going to add a test. And for this test, I'm going to validate that there are no files here. All right. Now, let me go ahead and I'm going to use input connection 1 because that's the connection I have there. And be aware that we can have multiple, and we'll see that. And then I want the records must match a specific value, but we will talk about some of the other options in here. And this is going to be 0. So, okay. And I run that. And I get an error on this. And I'm getting an error on that because I have a condition. It has to match 0, but it's not going to match 0 because I have files there, right? So as you'll note, it's actually throwing an error because it's not matching the condition, right? Your validation was not appropriate. All right. So what if I went ahead and changed that around a little bit? And I said, okay, is null. And then I run that. And now you'll note there are no records coming in. So my testing tool validates that it does equal 0. I've matched my condition and I'm good. Right? So this would be a good place to, this would be a good tool if you're doing a join and you want to make sure there's no exceptions and nothing falls out of either side. So you grab the left and the right output anchor, you put them into a testing tool, you say record count has to match 0. And then if you ever get something in there, it will go ahead and throw an alert for you. Right? And one of the things that I like to do, so let me go back to my throwing my alert, is that if I click on the white spot of the canvas, I have the configuration for the workflow as a whole. And one of the things that I could do is go to runtime and cancel running workflow on error. Right? So what happens is that when I run it now and it gets this error, as soon as it gets that error, the workflow gets canceled. And what this will do for you is this will prevent you from writing to your assets. Whatever you're trying to do, send an email, write to a database, write to a file. If you put this testing tool in here, if an alert is thrown, it won't write, which means you won't get bad data. So another one of the things that you can do is that you can go into the events, and we'll talk about this in another class, add an event, send an email, and then I can send an email if it runs with errors or runs without errors. So maybe I have one email that runs with errors, which sends an email to me saying, I got to fix this workflow. And then one that runs without errors, which would send your assets to your stakeholders, or maybe even just send you an email validating this ran without errors. Right? So there are a couple of different ways of using this tool to generate errors and then actually do something with them. All right, let's look at another example real quick. Let me go to the transform section and grab a summary tool down. And obviously, I'm just kind of artificially creating things. So with the summary tool, I'm just going to do something real simple here. And I'm just going to get a count of the full path. Right, so when I run that, it just gives me the number 10. And let me change this one back to is null. And so I don't get errors anymore. All right, and so now it's 10. And I'm going to go ahead and connect that up. So now I have a line 2. Okay. Now, with line 2 in here, I want to go ahead and I want to validate what that count is to make sure I've got something here. So I go into my tool and I'm going to add another condition here. And this particular condition will say validate files are on the output. Okay. Now my input is going to be line 2, not line 1 this time. And I want the record count to match a specific value, but I don't know what that value is going to be. I just want it to be something other than 0. So what I can do is I could say expression is true. Now, in this case, I'm going to say for first record because I only have one record because I'm doing a summary. But you could do expression is true for all records and validate everything. Right? So expression is true for first record. And then I'm going to go ahead and I got the 3 dots over here. And just like in the formula tool or in the filter tool, I can go ahead and I can grab the different things. So I'm going to go ahead in the expression over here and I'm going to say my count. Now note that when I type this in this tool, it doesn't actually pull things down. So I go count does not equal, and the spaces don't matter, just for clarity, 0. And I do OK. Right? So I'm saying that the count cannot equal 0. I run that, and everything works because this is greater than 0. Right? To validate that, I can say validate files are here, edit that, and we'll take that and we'll say the count equals 0. And when I run that, now I get the alert because that validation failed. All right. So we can go ahead and we can just do something simple. It has to equal a certain number or something like that. We can do something a little bit more complex, and we can actually add a formula to it to do some calculations. Recall the formulas do have to be true, false, yes, no. You're not going to be able to do like if-then statements and stuff like that. That's going to be a little bit more difficult. All right, last example here. Let me go ahead and grab down a summary tool. I'm going to hook that up again. And in this particular summary tool, I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm just going to do full path count. Right, and when I run that, it's configured identically to the top one here. I've got my count right here. I've got my count right there, right? 10 and 10, no big deal. I'm going to hook that up to my testing tool, line 3 now. And in this test, what I'm going to do is I'm going to match something. So I'm going to say, okay, let me create a test. And this test name is going to be record match. My input connection is going to be input 2. Now, I don't want to match a specific count. I don't want to do an expression, but I want record count matches other inputs record count. And my test value is going to be 3. So what it's going to do is look at 2, it's going to look at 3, and it's going to say, do the number of records match? And it did. Obviously, 1 record here, 1 record here. I could have done an expression to say, does this number equal that number? Count equal count. And that would make sure that the number of records are exactly the same. But I think you guys get the point. 3 different types of validations that we can do, comparing 2 inputs, as well as validating that there are certain numbers of records or running a formula against the records in an input. So a variety of ways of using this. You really only need one testing tool for your entire workflow because you can run as many tests as you want in a single tool. Or it might make sense to have multiple tools on so that you can document them a little bit better. It really just depends upon your needs. All right. So that covers what I'm going to go over for the testing tool. Great way of doing the validations. And don't forget that you can do this in combination with runtime so that you can cancel the workflow if you get errors. All right. All right. So let's go ahead and move down to my second section, preparation. Now, in the core exam, we covered a lot of these tools, but there are a couple of different tools that I'd like to cover which are a little bit more advanced, right? The first one I'd like to cover is the multi-row formula tool. I love the multi-row formula tool, right? So in the preparation section, I grab the multi-row formula, be it whether it's a multi-field formula and a multi-row formula. I'm going to grab the multi-row and I'm going to hook that up. Okay. Now, if we look at the incoming data for this, I've got record IDs, a URL, I've got my JSON name because this is just some JSON information that was parsed out. This is information about cheese from the Food and Drug Administration. You know, really exciting. I got, cheddar cheese. You can see the 0 is for the first food here. It's got a certain FDCID. I come down, there's 1, another FDCID. This is just capitalized versus not capitalized. You come down to this one. Now we have reduced fat. We come down to this one down here, etc., etc. So there's a bunch of information, more than you'd ever want to know about cheese. Okay? Now, this is not really structured very well. It can be a little difficult to work with. I want to visualize this in a different way. I want to kind of break these things out into their own individual columns. And there's a couple of different ways of doing that. But I'm going to show you how to do it with the multi-row formula tool. Okay? Now, with the multi-row formula tool, you can only do a single formula as opposed to the formula tool, which allows you to do multiple formulas. But what it allows you to do is look up and down in your rows. So let's go new field here. I can update or I can create. I'm going to create a new field. I'm going to call it FDCID. I decide what type I want it to be. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and just make it an integer. Oh, sorry, a VW string. Right? I note that everything here is just strings. Okay. Now, how many rows do I want to look up and down? And in my case, in this case, I'm just going to do 1. And if it's looking at a row that doesn't exist, what do you want that row to be? I'm going to be empty. Now, we can also group things if appropriate, and then we create our formula. So, what's going to happen is I'm going to look at this cell right here, right? And depending upon what I put in my formula. And when I say rows that don't exist, if I am at this cell looking at row -1, row -1 doesn't exist. And so that's going to be a 0 or an empty. All right, now let's get into an expression. So I'm going to go to the fx, go to conditional, and pull down an if-then statement. And I'm going to go ahead and spread this out just a little bit so it's a little bit more, a little easier to understand. All right, now, for my first condition, what I'm going to do is I'm looking for the word FDCID. If I see this word FDCID, then I know that that is the number, and I want to bring that over. Right? When I'm coming down here, I see the next FDCID. There's the number. I want to bring that number over. Right? Now I can do this with the formula tool. Say, hey, if you see the word FDIC, bring this over. If you don't see the word FDIC, make it null or something like that. And so I'd have this word, or sorry, this number listed out, and it would be a bunch of nulls in between. But what I want is I want this to come all the way down. I want this on every row within that food group. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, if it contains, and I'm looking for the JSON string, the JSON name, and the target that I'm looking for is FDCID. This word right there, right? And I'm doing contains because the food will change. It'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? If that's the case, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the JSON value string. right? Exactly like you did in the formula tool before. Simple if-then statement, right? If it contains this word, grab this value string. All right, here's where it gets to the next level. Else. Now, if this does not, so I get to the second row here, description. It does not contain FDCID. Well, what do I want to do now? Well, I've already copied this over. I just want to bring it down. So I can go to the X here, and now you'll note that I've got the row -1, row +1, and if I change that, you'll see it grows and contracts. I want to go row -1, and look, there's the column that I just created. And so I always look at this row by row, start with the first row. It has FDCID. It grabs the value, puts it over. It goes to the second. It doesn't have it, so it's going to grab it from the top one and drag it down. Same thing. It's just grabbing it and dragging it down. And then it gets to here. Oh, it does have it, so it brings the new number over and then drags it down. So when I run this now, I've created that FDCID number, and everywhere there's a new one, the number changes. Oftentimes, you guys will get spreadsheets that have funky information, and this is a good way of being able to bring it down so it's a little bit more structured so you can have that information on every row of your data as opposed to having to kind of try to figure it out. All right, so let's do another quick example here. I'm going to go ahead and drag down another multi-row formula tool. Okay. Now, with this particular one, what I want to do is I want to create an index for it. Okay. And what this index is going to do for me is the index is just going to give me the description for the cheese. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new field again. I'm not going to edit an existing field. And I'm going to call this index. I'm going to make it that VW string again because that's what I'm pulling from. I only want to go one row up and down, but we talked about that. I'm going to leave this, instead of empty, I'm going to say it's null. And you do have some different options there. No group bys. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab down the same kind of if-then statement. All right. Now, when I'm looking at this, if this first row here contains FDCID, I know that my description is always right below that. So the order of this data is going to matter a lot to this particular tool. So this is going to be very similar to our first example. I'm going to do a contains. And in the contains, I am looking at the JSON name. And if it contains FDCID, then, now before I was just pulling over this string, but I know that cheddar cheese is right below it. So I go to my X here, and I always recommend choosing the variables from here. When you type them in, it just doesn't always work. I'm going to go row +1 JSON value string. So it gets to that first row here. It sees the FDCID. It grabs this cell and copies it over here. Gets to the second one. It doesn't have FDCID. Well, I'm going to do the exact same thing that I did before. I'm just going to say, okay, this is going to be row -1 index. And then it's going to keep going until it reaches FDCID and changes it. So now what I've done is I pulled the JSON, the FDCID out. I pulled the name out, and you can see that. And here's where you can kind of see that uppercase, lowercase thing. And then they both change as appropriate. Right, so now you can see I'm starting to structure my data a little bit better. Right? Now, there's a bunch of things that you can do with this tool, right? It all just kind of depends upon exactly what you're trying to accomplish. Right? I could say, okay, I'm going to grab another multi-row formula tool, and I'm going to be simple about this. I'm going to create a new field. We'll call this numbering. Right? I'm going to make this one an integer. 0 or empty, only going to go up or down 1. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to group now on FDCID. Now for my expression is going to be row minus 1, numbering. And note that I still got that brand new plus 1. So it's going to go to that first row here. It's going to look at the row minus 1, which I'm telling it to do. And row minus 1 doesn't exist, it's 0. So it's going to add 1 to it. And then it's going to go to row 2 and add a 1. And then row 3 and then add a 1. So it's going to number everything. But I also said to group it by FDCID. So it's going to look at the FDCID column, and every time it gets to a new FDCID, it's going to start over again. Now, on this row right here, technically there is a minus 1, but since I'm grouping, minus 1 in the second group is still going to be that 0 or empty. It doesn't exist. So when I run this, it starts numbering, and every time it hits a new cheese, it starts over again. All right. So that kind of covers the multi-row formula tool. It allows you to look up and down in rows and take action. Probably the most common use I see is something along these lines where you're bringing a value over and then writing it down to every single line. Things in that type of a category. Now, if you wanted to take a slightly more practical look at it, I've got my yogurt example here, which kind of shows you what I'm talking about with a lot of this stuff, right? I'm looking at different yogurts here, and I've got my holdings right here, and the holdings show you weekly information, and then a second holding, weekly information, and then a third holding, weekly information. But what I really want to do here is instead of looking at each of the weekly informations, I want this to be on each row, because that's a little bit more of a structured format. That's something that I can do something with. This is a difficult format to really work with. All right, so let me prep this data a little bit, and I'm going to grab a filter tool and drag that down. And then with that filter tool, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say, okay, I want F1, because I don't have column headers and stuff. And I want F1, I'm getting rid of some specific dates in here. Does not contain January. Zero. And this was just a piece of fake information in my data. So I'm cleaning my data up a little bit. Whoops, got to get that right. Right, run that. All right, let's go find that. There we go. Clean that out. This is why I do the copy paste. Yep, does not contain. All right, so now I've gotten rid of all that bad data, that bad information. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab a sample tool. And I've got these nulls on here, and there's a couple of ways of approaching this. I could have just filtered out the nulls as well. But I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, skip the first two rows. All right, so now I've got my data with the holdings and the weeks a little bit more structured than it was before. So I'm going to grab that multi-row formula tool and hook that up here. And then I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, I'm going to create a new field. We'll call it holding company. It's going to be a V string. Now, I'm going to leave this as 0 or empty. Now, I need to somehow differentiate on this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull in that if-then statement again. And I'm going to say, okay, I want to look at this word. And if the first word is weak, ignore that. Because none of my holdings are going to start with weak, but all of my reporting will start with weak. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, let's look at the left characters. So I'm going to go left. Right? The string that I'm going to look at is going to be F1. And I'm just going to grab the first 4 characters. So I look at F1 here, and I'm going to grab the first 4. Right? This will prevent any holding company from maybe having the name weak in it or something like that. So if the left equals, so if the left 4 does not equal the word weak, and I got to put that in quotes because that is a string, then I want to grab F1 here, the holding company. Now, if it doesn't contain, or if it does contain the word weak, then just like before, I'm going to drag that name of that holding company down. So that's going to be row -1, holding company, which comes down at the bottom there. Now, when I run that, go all the way to the end here, it brings over that holding company, and then right there, row 54, it changes to a new holding company. Now, there's a lot of different ways I could have done this. I could have pivoted off the nulls that were in here. I probably could have done a contain, like weak ending. So I could have triggered off a variety of different things. But I think this kind of gives you some good examples of how you'd use the multi-row and where to use it. All right. Let's come down to the multi-field formula. Okay. Now, I find the multi-row is probably the most useful that you're going to get, right? But the multi-field formula can do things that other tools can't do. So let me grab the multi-field and I'm going to connect it up here. Now, what the multi-field allows you to do is it allows you to look at all of your data at the same time. Right now, this right here is just information about sales and stuff. So I got years and the bookings or the sales that were done in the individual months, right? But in my situation, kind of what I want to do is I want to look at each one of these as a percentage of the total. Now, it's kind of tough to do. I could put a formula tool in here and I could say, okay, yeah, create a formula tool for April, continue a formula tool for August, etc., doing the math and calculating. So I got 12 formulas in there. But I can do that a lot easier with the multi-field formula tool. So I'm selecting specific columns, and the reason it does this is because since it looks at everything, obviously you can't do the same things with numbers as you can with strings or time or things like that. So I'm looking into numeric fields. I'm going to select everything except for year. And again, we have the dynamic. So if these change, it'll be just fine. I'm going to go ahead and copy the output and add new to it. Right? Well, we'll call it percent. Okay? As a prefix, but you can make prefix or suffix. I'm going to change my output to a fixed decimal. 19.2. I like that because it makes it a little bit easier to read. Now for my expression, here's where it gets a little bit more interesting. Now I'm going to just do a math expression. I'm not going to worry about actual functions and stuff. But when I look at my expressions, I've got current field and then the field name and the field type, as well as existing columns. I'm going to pick current field. So what it's doing is every time it is on a field, that'll be the current field. And I want to divide the current field by the total. And then I want to multiply that whole thing, because I want a percent instead of a decimal, times 100. And when I run that, what it's going to give me is percent of August, percent of April. And so this is the percent of the year that each one of these did, each one of those months. And the percent of the total is obviously 100, right? I probably should have done and just removed the total from it. Boom. Right? So all my percentages. Now, if I didn't want to copy the fields, I could have unchecked that and it would just overwrite the existing fields. And so now when I run it, it's overwritten every field. And I'd like to note, this is one of the few tools in Alteryx that actually changed the data type. Right? So when I look at my metadata over here, data type is all fixed decimal here, and it was all double coming into it. So this actually allows you to change the data type of a field. So be aware of that. So fairly powerful tool. A lot of things you could do with it. It can really make things easy for you moving forward, depending upon what you're trying to accomplish. All right. So let's talk about this a little bit more. I've just got some basic information here. Let's look at the metadata. You can see these are like V strings, and there's the name, right? And the metadata is actually what we're going to be working with here. And let me drag down another multi-field formula. Okay. Now, in this case, I'm going to choose my text fields. Right, so all these fields are text. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to overwrite those fields. And my formula here is I'm going to say, okay, let's look at the X. We worked with current field name, which are the actual fields, but I'm going to get current field name. And then just for clarification, I'm going to do plus, quote, equals, quote, plus, and then I'm going to do current field type, just to kind of show you what it is. And when I run that, well, it gave me an error. Let me look at my output here. No output. My input here. So it gave me an output because I didn't select any fields. Run that. So what it's doing, it's saying, okay, there's your column header, and there's your data type. Column header, data type. Right? Now, I haven't personally seen many use cases that people use this, but I did at least want to show you the last two elements of the multi-field tool. Generally, I'm seeing it working with the current field. All right, so let's go ahead and move on. The next tool that I'd like to talk about is going to be the generate rows, right? It's a powerful tool, but it's a little bit of a finicky tool, right? Now, the text that I started with here is just a couple of dates, right? And we do note that they are in the date format, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to reach up and I'm going to go ahead and grab the generate rows tool. And I'm going to hook that up. Okay? And now with the generate rows tool, what you're looking at is it is going to generate individual rows between these two. So it's going to enumerate things in this situation. Now, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a new field. And I'm going to call that field date. And it's going to be a date field. Now, my initial expression, where's my starting point here, is going to be number 1 here. All right, this is the date that I want to start with. So I'm going to go ahead and do, whoops, 1. Okay. Now, I could create a more complex expression. Now, when do I want to end? What's my final thing? Okay, and this is a little bit tricky. Okay, so your condition in this particular case is I'm going to do a date time add. Well, actually, let me show you first. Let me do a date. And the date has to be less than number 2. Okay, and then my loop expression is going to be date time add. Because every single time it runs through, I want to add a day to it. And it's going to be date. The increment is going to be 1. And the unit is going to be days. All right. So when I run that, what it does is it starts with this date, moves that date over, increments it, increments it, increments it, all the way down until the very end. And I did it this way because what I wanted to show you is that this actually increment stopped right before this date. And I find that if I'd say do an equals here, that causes problems. I don't know why. And you'll notice it didn't even give me anything here. Right? So let me put that less than again. And later than, or greater than, obviously just goes into an infinity loop. Right? So what I do to fix this is instead of just looking at the date, I do a date time add. Oops. And I go ahead and look at the date. Instead of a +1, I do a -1 with days. So I'm subtracting 1 from the day. I run it, and now I actually get my final output here, which ends exactly when it's supposed to end. So, like I said, it's a little bit of a finicky tool. I've never been able to get equals to work. It's always greater than, less than. But just kind of be aware that this is the way you can format these things. I would use this as kind of an example template because oftentimes if I switch these two around and I say 2 has to be greater than the date time add. You get some funkiness in there too. So just kind of be aware that it is a little bit of a finicky tool, but a lot of powerful things that you can do. And again, just kind of use this as a template to start with. All right. So last thing I'd like to talk about today is regular expression. Okay. Now, for regular expression, we touched on it a little bit in the core class just to kind of understand it. Right? But I'd like to go into just slightly more detail about it this time. Okay. So, what I'd like to do is I've got this string right here, and the string is broken out into song ID, and then there's a comma, and then release date. There's the release date in there, and then there's actually an asterisk, and then the duration, and then another asterisk, and then whether the danceability, whether it's popular, the key ID, and the song ID. Right, so we have all of that information in here, and it's all separated by a variety of things, right? Or maybe even it's not separated. Maybe it's just I've got the date right here, and then it just kind of runs off into other things. Okay? And I want to parse this out, and I want to make this a little bit more functional, right? I want to actually pull all this information out of here. So, you could do this probably with a text to columns. It would take a while, but you could do it. You could break on this and you could break on that, etc., etc. But I want to do it a little bit differently. I'm going to go over to the parsing section, and I'm going to grab the RegEX tool down, and I'm going to connect it up. And we'll talk about this in a couple of different contexts. Now, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, I need a regular expression to describe everything. And I'm going to go ahead and parse it, and then go ahead and have my individual columns. Right? Now, you do have other methods here that I didn't talk about. You can do a replace. So what it does is it looks for you create the expression, put parentheses around something, and whatever's in parentheses will be replaced by whatever you tell it to. And you can have multiple parentheses and stuff like that, and it would replace multiple things. There's a variety of ways that you can do it. There's some good examples in the open example that you can look at with that. You could do a match, and the match will go ahead and just say, does this string match what I'm trying to find or not? Right? And then you can tokenize. And when you tokenize, you go ahead and create your regular expression, and it will go ahead and break it up into segments of that regular expression. Right? Although I do find parse to be, the majority of what people are going to use here. All right. So let's take a look at what we have here. And you can always go to RegEX 101, which I talked about, and then just paste this in and build it out there. Also super easy. So I'm going to go to the regular expression. I'm looking at this first thing here, and I've got some word followed by a comma. So I click on the plus here. I've got a word, and I come down, and there's a word right here. And I'm going to put that in parentheses because that's the first thing I'm trying to break out. And then it's followed by a comma. Right? You can see the comma in there. Okay? Now note that once I break it out here, I've got my first expression. And my first expression is that word. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to call that song ID. Oops, ID. Now, one of the things that I always do is I put a dot asterisk at the end. And dot asterisk is any single character, one or more. And that just kind of allows my expression to work. So when I run that, it goes ahead and pulls the song ID over. And all the rest of it would just go into whatever. Right? So, but that does allow me to run the string. Okay. Now, what's the next thing that I want to pull out here? Right, so I look back at my string here. I have a date. And it's going to be digits slash 4 digits for the year. Right? Month could be more than one. Day could be more than one. All right. So let's go ahead and figure that one out. So, second thing that I want to pull out is it is going to be a digit. So let me get rid of the dot asterisk at the end there. And I've got a digit down here, \d. And for that digit, it's going to be 1 or more. So I do a plus. And then I've got a second digit, and it's going to also be 1 or more. And I could click this or I could type these out. But there's something in between these, which is that backslash. Now, the backslash is a control character. You know, it's showing me the digits. So what I have to do is in between those, I have to put a backslash and then the slash for my, oh, I'm sorry, no, backslash is okay. Put the straight backslash in there. All right. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, I've got more digits. Oh, I'm sorry, I got that other backslash. And then I got more digits. But I know it's always going to be 4 in this case for the year. So I can use the curly cues to put a 4 in there. So there's always going to be 4. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the parentheses around them. And then at the very end, I'm going to do that dot asterisk. Right? And I'm going to even put parentheses around it this time, just so that you can kind of see what it's going to give me. Okay? And this is going to be the date. All right, so I've got 1 or more digits. And then after that, I've got the slash, backslash, and then 1 or more digits, backslash, and then I've got 4 digits. So I run that, and now I've got the date, and you can see that everything else got pulled out. All right. So now when I continue to look at it, I've got some digits followed by an asterisk. All right. So then I can continue this, and I can say, okay, I've got digits, and it's 1 or more. Whoops. Let me get rid of that. At the end, I've got, and I'm just going to do the parentheses right now. I've got digits, and I've got 1 or more. Close my parentheses, and then the dot asterisk. And then I got that third expression down here, and I'm going to call that the duration. And I run that. And now I've got the duration pulled out. Okay. Now the next thing that I want to pull out after the duration is I've got the 0.7. Right? That's going to be the danceability. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say, okay, after that, I've got an asterisk. Right? So after my duration there, 141, I've got an asterisk, but I don't want the asterisk. And then after that, it's always going to be less than 1, so it's going to be 0 dot something. So I'm going to go ahead and do my parentheses, and it's going to be a 0. And the 0 is going to come through because I'm putting it in here. And then a dot is a special character. So I have to do a backslash dot to say it's actually going to be a dot. And then backslash D plus. So there's going to be characters after that. And let me close my parentheses and do that dot asterisk at the end. And you'll note that I've got the 0 and then the escape character because I need to say it is specifically a dot, not any character, which is what a normal dot says. So if you have any of these escape characters here, the dot, the asterisk, the plus, things like that, you need to qualify them in certain situations. And then this is going to be dance. And go ahead and run that. And so now when I look at my output here, note that everything is kind of garbage here. Well, that tells me that I did something wrong in here, right? And that's important to note because if you do something wrong, everything kind of goes squirrely. Okay? Now, instead of that, let me backslash over that, dot asterisk, and run that. So now I'm back to where I was before, and this is a great way, as you're building your expression, and I'll go ahead and just put this in parentheses so that we can see it. As you're building your expression, you want to go ahead and just be able to go back and forth so that you're not doing an all or nothing. All right? So what's being put at the very, very end here is asterisk 0.7 asterisk 99. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, I've got an asterisk there. And note that the asterisk is a special character. So what I need to do is put that escape character in front of it. Because note that the asterisk came through here. It was saying 0 or more for this expression in parentheses. This expression in parentheses, which was the backslash D plus. Right? But I didn't have that because it ended in the asterisk. So now when I run it, you'll note that that asterisk is gone because I eliminated it with the backslash there. All right. So let's go ahead and let's add parentheses there for my next expression. Okay. And we'll do that exact same expression again. It was the 0, and then the escape character for the dot, and then the digit, and then 0 or more, or 1 or more rather. And now when I run that, I now have that number, and then I got the remainder here. All right. Now, I've got another asterisk here. And so then I need to do another escape character asterisk. And now when I run that, you'll note that the asterisk is gone. right? And the regex out here is that I should rename that. That's going to be popularity, right? And you do know that the first line right here is showing you the answers so that you know that I'm breaking out the right things, right? So that's going to be popularity. So I need to break out the key ID next. Okay? And for the key ID, there is some interesting things in there, right? So backslash over this. So I got rid of that last asterisk. And then what I'm going to have, oh, I'm sorry, that's not popularity. That is danceability. So the next thing that I'm going to want to break out here is that 99. So what I'm going to have here is, let's go ahead and do my parentheses. And it's going to be that same digit. Whoops. And there's my parentheses. It's going to be that same digit. And it is going to be one or more. Then I've got the square bracket. And I got to put a square bracket in there. But again, it's a special character. So I've got to do the backslash square bracket. And I don't want those. And then another set of parentheses. And I've got those same digits. And then close my parenthesis. I did the same thing. And then close the parenthesis. And then at the very end, I've also got a square bracket. Right? And I get two more regex for those two digits separated by those characters. This is going to be popularity. And this is going to be the key. And when I run that, I've now broken out that entire string into the individual components. Right? I've got the word for the song ID, and then I formatted the date a little bit more specifically. I was able to just use regular characters for the backslash because it's not a special character. And then I pulled out everything else, and also be aware that for the asterisks, which are special characters, and the square brackets, I did have to use the escape character to say it's the exact character instead. Now, there's a lot of ways of accomplishing this, right? So, for example, let me go ahead and copy this. Right, so I've got the exact same thing twice here. But I didn't have to use these exact same things, right? I could have done it in slightly different ways, right? So let's say I had the digits at the end here, but that was all there was before the bracket, or in between those brackets. So instead of that, I could have just said dot asterisk. And you'll note that it changes it down here. And when I run that, it gives you the exact same thing. Right? Make that key. Thought I changed that. Right? So regex is an art form, and by no means are you actually locked in here. Right? For the word here, instead of doing that word, I know this is just a whole bunch of characters, uppercase, lowercase, and numbers, and then I hit that asterisk. And the asterisk is kind of that ending delimiter. Well, I'm sorry. I hit the comma, and the comma is the ending delimiter, which is right there. So what I could have said is, instead of getting that whole word, I could have put a square bracket in there. I could have said lowercase a through z, and then uppercase A through Z, and then 0 through 9 in that square bracket, and do a plus, one or more. And so I can just list out the characters that have to be in here. I can do a range of characters, or I can do individual characters. And now when I run that, I'm getting the exact same thing yet again. Right? So, like I said, a variety of ways of approaching it. It really just depends upon what you're trying to do. All right, let me copy this one more time and paste it and hook it up. And I could just keep going on here. I could keep changing. So I could do all this, but I know it's a bunch of stuff that ends in a comma. Let me look at my input. It's a bunch of stuff that ends in a comma. So I could actually, instead of all of this stuff, I could have just said dot asterisk. And it gives me the same thing. It's anything followed by a comma, which is what I had here. Right? The date is pretty specific, and I did have to pull out those characters after the date. But instead of this right here, I've got the asterisk and the asterisk uh, book holding that. And so I could have just swapped all that in the parentheses. And I could have also changed that to a dot asterisk. And I could run that, and I get the exact same thing. So a variety of ways to approach these things. I really like the dot asterisk because it's everything. So if you have some separators that you can use, and I looked at here, I've got like the comma as a separator. Now I didn't have a good separator here, which is kind of why I use these formulas here. But then I had a bunch of asterisks and things like that, which really made it work for me. All right, so just kind of be aware of that. That there's no right or wrong answer for that as long as it works. You might want to be very, very specific, like we did in the first one here, where we're very, very tactical about exactly what we wanted to see in here. Maybe a little less flexibility, a little bit more specificity. And then down here, when we're doing a lot more generalities, which will tend to catch more things, but you might catch what you don't want. So again, a lot of different ways of doing it. I wanted to show you a couple of different examples, a few different ways of approaching it, a few variations and things that, in this situation worked out the same to kind of give you some feeling for how it can be used. Again, you can go ahead and look at the answer key, which will give you all these expressions so you can kind of look at them and kind of see what was done and use that as an example. I highly recommend the website RegEX 101 because we could have built all of this in RegEX 101. Let me go ahead and bring up RegEX 101 and give you an example of that. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this out here. And we will go ahead and paste that into RegEX 101. Right, so there's our first string. And you could put multiple strings in here. Right, I believe that if we grab the second string, there's that second string in there. And we can say, okay, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do a dot asterisk. And you can see it kind of grabs everything. And then I'll put that in quotes or parentheses. All right. Now I'm going to do a comma because we had that comma here. And then I'm going to do another dot asterisk. And so you can see it's starting to parse this out and break this out, right? If I wanted to go ahead and break up these numbers. Well, okay, after that comma, then I'm going to go ahead and put another set of parentheses in here. And I'm going to say it's going to be a backslash D. Oh, and now I'm grabbing that first digit. I'm going to do a backslash. Now, RegEX 101 doesn't like the backslash, so I have to put an escape character in front of it. Now it gets the backslash. And that's not a D, that's actually a D plus because I want one or more. And then I could do like another backslash D plus. And you can kind of see it's just moving along and grabbing things. And then the escape character, so I can put that backslash in. And then another D plus. But you can see the D plus grabbed everything, including the extra stuff. So I don't want that plus. I want the curly Q 4. So I want to specify only 4. So you can see how I'm kind of building it along. It might be easier to build it in RegEX 101. Over here, it kind of talks about the different groups, the matchings that you're doing. Down here is a little bit of a key, which tells you the different things that you could do in here. And then you could, for the most part, take this entire thing and just paste that right into Alteryx, and we're good to go with that. Okay, I like this one because it's easy to do, it's easy to change. Whereas Alteryx, you got to keep running, and you can't necessarily see a lot of things. Whereas this one with the color coding, it just makes it really simple, and you can put multiple strings in there to kind of see how it's responding to each string. And again, you can generally copy this directly into Alteryx. There might be a few differences, but just kind of be aware that this website exists and can really help you as long as chat gpt. So I hope today was really useful for you guys. I hope you enjoyed all of the advanced level tools there, the intermediate level tools. And I hope you guys stay tuned for like the macro courses and the other courses that I'll be posting soon. Any questions, go ahead and give me a ring. Thanks.